Before we begin, I'd like to pay my respects to my teacher, the Most Venerable John May Park. And to Yuhei Kwang Sunim. And to your Sangha. I hope you're all doing well. Good to see you all. Today's Dhamma talk is on non-self, the 5 aggregates, and rebirth. Perhaps one of the most important questions in life is, what happens to us after we die? Presently, there are 3 positions on human destiny after death. The first one holds that there is no afterlife. That is, human consciousness is just a product of the brain, so when the brain and body die, you are annihilated. The second is called the theistic view, which is found in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The belief here is that just after one lifetime, one goes to an eternal heaven or hell, depending on your actions, but most importantly, depending on your beliefs. And the third and last one is called rebirth. Variations of this view are found in Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. Now, if a person takes the first view, that is the materialistic view, they will believe that there are no moral consequences to their actions after they die. They will be extinguished and feel no pleasure, no pain, because of what they have done during this lifetime, as they believe there are no consequences to their actions. Now, the second view puts more emphasis on a person's relationship with a God, and obtain admittance into heaven, and avoid an everlasting hell. Rebirth in Buddhism is the view that when you die, you are reborn in another form. Now, people often ask, what's the difference between reincarnation and rebirth? Reincarnation implies a permanent self, that is, a permanent identity, an unchanging identity that moves on from life to life. Rebirth, on the other hand, is a bit more complex. It holds that there is no permanent self. If one holds that there is no permanent self, then the question becomes, what is it that takes rebirth? Now, unique to Buddhism is the view that you're composed of 5 things. 1 part body, in Pali called rupa, and 4 parts mind, in Pali called nama. These 5 are collections or aggregates, or they're sometimes called khandas. Khanda translates from Pali to mean group, heap, or aggregate. So we're going to use aggregate in this course. There are 5 aggregates. Firstly, let's just list them. Number 1 is form or body. Number 2 is called feeling. Number 3 is perception. Number 4 is mental formations, thoughts, intentions. And number 5 is consciousness. In this case, we mean attention. To understand the 5 parts, let's use the example of you listening to me giving this Dhamma talk. You have form, your body, with the physical organ of the ear. You hear this talk because the sound waves travel from my mouth to your ear. That's form. That's the first aggregate. Now the second aggregate of feeling comes into play when the sound registers in your ear and is then transmitted to your mind. Then you perceive there is sound, and you recognize that the sound is me talking, and you understand what the words mean. That's perception. That's the third aggregate. Once you understand the words I am saying, then you develop ideas about them. You may think I make sense, or you may have questions in your mind, or you may disagree completely with what I'm saying. This is the fourth aggregate, mental formations. This also includes your intentions and volitional actions. Your awareness of your thoughts and attention is the fifth aggregate. This is the fruition of the ego's complex game of building itself up. I mean, we're not a thing, we're a process. We don't have a permanent identity. We're constantly changing, constantly in flux. We do exist, however. In the Khandavagga, in the connected discourses, the Buddha states your body does exist, but it's impermanent, suffering, and non-self. He goes on to say that your feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness do exist, but they too are impermanent, suffering, and non-self. It's important to point this out because some Buddhists go too far and say that we don't exist, that we're an illusion, a foam on the top of a wave. We do exist, and more importantly, our suffering exists, and we want to do something about that. All of your memories, hopes and dreams, and future rebirths are wrapped up in form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Now, the Buddha didn't use the words, there is no self, but the reason the Buddha taught anatta, meaning non-self, because each of the 5 aggregates is impermanent. None of them can be called self. Even put together and combined, there is no real self there. Remember, the idea of self or soul implies an everlasting entity or being of some kind. None of the aggregates are like that. Your physical life is impermanent. Your body is not yourself. I mean, our senses, perceptions, and thoughts are fleeting from moment to moment. They are not permanent. They are not self. Our consciousness, our self-consciousness, fades in and out like an old television that's on the blink. So I think we're getting the idea that all of these things are impermanent and nothing that we can hold on to as what one would traditionally call a self. So the question becomes, what takes rebirth? Your karma, that is what's been put in motion, and the 5 aggregates go with you from life to life. But the Buddha proposes that the idea that we have a permanent identity is false. For example, if you are Jane Smith in this life, there is no everlasting Jane Smith after you die. Your self-concept of Jane Smith is a false assumption. And after you die, your karma and your 5 aggregates will come together again in another form. Perhaps Sharon Jones in Vancouver. Jane Smith will be a buried past life memory existing in Sharon Jones. That's the idea of non-self and rebirth. You still continue, but you do not continue as the identity you are now. In meditation or post-meditation, it is good practice for you to mentally review your body, senses, perceptions, thoughts, and awareness. By focusing attention on the 5 aggregates, we become increasingly aware that we are not a thing, we are a process. And that's beneficial both on and off the cushion. In fact, one could go as far as saying that Buddhist meditation practice is built upon the concept of non-self. Now, of course, in this discussion, there is ultimate reality and there is conventional reality. And of course, the Buddha used conventional speech such as I, you, we, he, she, etc. Because as the Buddha pointed out, one needs to use conventional speech or people just won't understand you. So of course there's nothing wrong with using conventional speech in terms of conventional reality. When I say, I saw my mother the other day, you understand what I mean. Or if I say, I had a wonderful time at the temple, or you had a wonderful time at the temple, we all know what we mean. Now, of course, we have to use conventional speech. Just know that in ultimate reality, there is no such thing as I, you, he, or she, and that we're all made up of the 5 aggregates.